So today we're going to get into learning how to use the retouching tool, the spot healing brush, and also how to manipulate an image, cutting off the top of the head of a subject and creating a bowl with inside the top of their head. To begin, we're going to go up to File in Photopea. Under File, we're going to go to Open. And under my downloads, I'm going to select out the photo headshot. And we already have a pre-existing image that I've eliminated the background for, but we're going to learn how to modify the image overall. To begin, we're going to zoom in closer to the subject so we can see some of the blemishes on the skin. And over on the left side navigation, we're going to go down to the 8th icon, the spot healing brush tool. It looks like a little band-aid with a little star next to it. The spot healing brush tool eliminates out spots that you go over top of without having to do a pre-selected point, unlike the healing brush tool, which you have to select out a certain area to match that and replicate that area. But with the spot healing brush, it's a little bit simpler, but the one thing that we have to do is modify our hardness of the brush. So before we start manipulating, we want to go over to the left side navigation at the top. We can see where it says 15 pixels for this brush size. Click on the drop down and we're going to reduce the hardness to about 50%. And I'm going to scale up the size of my brush right now to about 40 pixels. When it comes into resizing your brush, we want to make sure that we take advantage of the shortcut keys. The left bracket next to the P key will reduce the size of your brush, and the right bracket will scale up the size of your brush. But when it comes into blemishes, we don't want to go too large with the brush size. We just want to be able to go right over top of a certain blemish and simply click, and you see that the spot healing brush does a great job of masking and clearing out that blemish. But before we get into erasing out these blemishes, we're going to duplicate the background layer. I want you to be able to see the difference between using the spot healing brush and leaving the image as is. So over on the right side navigation, we're going to right click on the layer and duplicate the layer. Now we see background copy. I'm going to rename this layer head, and we can keep the background. So with the head layer, we're going to look to use the spot healing brush over all the blemishes on the face. I can simply click point by point. Again, I can shrink the size of the brush if I need to get smaller blemishes, or enlarge it for bigger blemishes. Realistically, you can just simply click over the area, but sometimes you may want to click and drag just to get slightly larger areas. Make sure that they're getting inside of the selected area. And this is just a quick, effective tool to take out those little marks on skin, any bumps, moles that are unwanted moles that you don't want. As we go down the face, we can see different areas that we may want to take out, little hairs as well. For the larger mole around the lip, just again resize the brush, and you can go back over it a couple times just in case if it needs to go over again. And for this little smile line, I may want to click and drag, just go down the smile line, and again it does a good job of taking that out. But again, we don't want to go too large with the brush. If I were to go too large with the brush and went over, say, the cheek area, it may pick up a random piece of the face, like an eyeball, where you see like the eyelashes here, which we definitely don't want. So keep your brush relatively small. We're just going over the little blemishes. You can even get the cracks on the lips for chapped lips. Just helps to smooth it out a little bit, make them a little bit softer. And just that quickly, you have a number of blemishes cleared out. If I were to take a look at the difference between our retouched image versus the original, I'm going to hide the head layer. And you can see as I click back and forth where it had the original blemishes, like the mole on the lip or the moles on the neck or the pimples or acne on the forehead, it clears out when you use the spot healing brush tool. Next, we're going to look to manipulate the exterior and detach the forehead area to create a lid for the head. So we're going to first hide the background layer. It's important that we hide the background layer so we don't let that background distract from our overall image. Next, with our head layer, we're going to use the magic wand tool to click on the white background. And most times you'll likely have a more complicated background in which you'll want to use the Polygonal Lasso tool or take your time drawing around the subject. The object select might be more difficult because if it's a more difficult image or a more complicated background than a white background. So just understand that you have to be adaptable. But once I have the magic wand over on the left side navigation, it's the fourth tool on the left side navigation, same section as the quick selection and object selection. We're going to click on the white background, and if I take a closer look, it is selected around the edge of the head. But once we have this white area selected around the head, we need to invert our selection. To invert our selection, you're going to go to the top navigation, click on select at the top navigation, and click inverse. And once you inverse, then we're going to add a raster mask, sometimes called a layer mask in Photoshop, but in Photopea known as a raster mask. That is down at the bottom of the layers panel, that little white rectangle with a little black circle inside of it. Add raster mask. And you see that we add gray and white boxes to the background, representing a transparent area. So once we have that transparent area, we're going to look to modify the document size. I'm going to zoom out just so we can see the whole canvas. And with our canvas, we're going to go up to image at the top navigation, down to canvas size. And where our height says 2148, we're going to change to 3000. But again, it's going to be dependent on your document. All images are different, but for this demonstration, we're going to be maintaining 3000 for the height. When I click OK, you see that it expanded down on the bottom and on the top of the subject. And then I can click and drag the subject down to the bottom of the canvas so that the shoulders touch the edge of the document. So before we can actually manipulate the image, we need to now apply the raster layer mask onto the head layer. So over on the layers panel, we're going to take a look at that little black and white rectangle appearing next to our thumbnail for the head layer. You're going to right click on the black square. Again, if you do not click on the actual black thumbnail, you're going to get a different menu bar. We want to make sure that we're selecting directly on the rectangle where it has that white silhouette of the head. And in that selection, we're going to select apply. We have disable raster mask, delete raster mask, but we want to simply choose apply. And when you click apply, you're going to see that the raster mask should disappear, but the gray and white background remains within the image. So we have a transparent background. So next, we're going to zoom in closer to the forehead of our subject. Once we zoom in, we're going to look to manipulate taking off the top portion of the head, separating it from the rest of the face. So over on the left side navigation, we're going to select on the rectangle select, or excuse me, the ellipse select. The rectangle select does the rectangle shape. The ellipse select will give us the oval shape that we need. So with the ellipse select, I'm going to look to draw a rectangular shape that extends across the subject's head. And we want to leave enough room in between that oval that we can look to add in an open area. So I'm going to be extending the area from the edge of the hair on the left to the edge of the hair on the right. And again, leaving enough room that I can add in objects or create an open space within the forehead area. So once I've extended all the way to the right side, I can release my mouse. We still see that the dotted line appears there. But now we want to look to add in the top portion of the head with this selection. To add in this portion of the head, we're going to go over to third tool, left side navigation. If you're working off a Chromebook, the icons might be condensed, but we're looking for the Lasso Tool. So with the Lasso Tool, we're going to look to select the top portion of the head, but we want to combine it with the shape that we've already created with the elliptical select. To do this, I'm going to move my cursor towards the middle of the forehead, and I'm going to hold down Shift. When I hold down Shift, your cursor should become a plus sign. And when our cursor is at plus sign, I can look to click and drag to draw around the top portion of the head. I recommend using a mouse, but if you are using your trackpad, just take your time. And then I'm going to go all the way to the other side of where the ellipse select is and draw through the forehead to get back to where I started with this drawing. When I release my mouse, it should add the additional area on the top portion. So we have one combined shape selecting out just the top part of the head. I can zoom out, Command minus, or on a Mac, or Control minus on a PC or Google Chromebook. Once I have this area selected, we want to make a copy. So Control C on a Windows, Command C on a Mac. That is copy. And then we are going to hit backspace or delete. And we should chop off the top of the head. But because we made a copy, we now want to paste it, and it should paste directly back where it was. And we can see a little line separating out where the forehead is. But if we take a look at our layers panel, we now have the background, we have the head layer, and then we have this new layer 1, which we're going to rename lid. So just like a lid of a cookie jar, we're going to be creating the top of the head as a lid for the subject's head overall. Once we made that copy, we're going to look to use the Move tool, the first tool, left side navigation, and click and drag it up to separate it from the subject. We can always manipulate this later on, but for right now, we just need it further away, out of the way. That's not going to interfere. Then we're going to zoom back in towards the forehead where we cut it out originally. And we're going to create a new layer. With this new layer, we're going to rename this layer Bowl Lip. So it's just that outer edge of a bowl before it goes on the inside. We're going to create the lip of the bowl. So we're going to first create the flattened area that gives the top of the bowl. So we're going to go back to our ellipse select. Second tool, left side navigation. And with the ellipse select, I'm going to look to draw out another oval shape. I'm going to start a little bit lower, but I'm looking to relatively match it up to where the rest of the head is. So I'm going to move my cursor downward and then click and drag it up to do my best to replicate the shape that we originally created. If I need to adjust it slightly, I can take my time to try matching it up as best possible. If it's not perfect, you can always use the arrow keys on your keyboard to nudge it up or down to get it to match to where you want. But once we have the area drawn in, we're going to look to fill in this area with the skin tone of the subject. To fill it in with the skin tone of the subject, we're going to go over to the left side navigation. The 7th icon above the spot healing brush, we're going to go to the eyedropper tool. The eyedropper tool does a great job of picking up any colors. Any area that we click on, it's going to replicate the color that it's seeing. So if I go towards the iris or the pupil of the eye, it will pick up tones, and you'll see that it applies into the foreground color over on the left side navigation. If I move my cursor over towards the light portion of the hair, it gets that lighter brown color. If I go to the dark portion of the hair, it gets that dark brown color. Or what we're looking for is getting around the middle of the forehead, getting a mid-tone for the skin, this peach color for this subject. And I can slightly adjust if I feel it's too light or if it's too dark. I can click around till I'm satisfied with the overall color. But because we have this area selected out already with the ellipse select, we're going to look to fill it in using the paint bucket tool. The paint bucket tool is the 11th icon or 12th icon where the gradient tool is located. We want to get the paint bucket. With the paint bucket tool, we're going to look to fill in this area. It's automatically going to recognize the foreground color as the color that we're filling in. And I'm simply going to click inside of the open space that we've drawn in, and it should fill in with a flat variation of the color that we selected. So if I zoom out, Control minus, you see that we have a flat area which is representing the top of the head where it's cut out. But we're going to look to cut an inlet, the inside or opening of the bowl. So we want to maintain and leave that dotted line of the ellipse select. We're going to use that dotted line and contract it, make it smaller to stay proportional to exactly where it is. So we still have the bowl lip selected. We still have that ellipse select dotted line appearing around the area that we just filled. And now everyone is going to go up to select at the top navigation. Under select, you're going to go down to modify. And under modify, we're going to go to contract. Contract, again, will make the circle smaller when we put in the specific pixels that we want. For my design, I'm going to look to put in 25 pixels. It gives me a little bit of a bumper, but not too large that it's going to overtake or overpower the rest of the image. So when the pop-up for the contract comes up, you can highlight where it says 1 pixel and change it to 25 pixels. Again, your head size might be different. You might have a smaller image or larger image, so be ready to adjust your contract. It could be 10 pixels, it could be 50 pixels. It all depends on the size of your image. But for my image, we're going to put in 25 and click OK. And if I take a closer look, we still see the dotted lines appearing around the forehead, around this area. And just like we did before of cutting out the top of the forehead, we're going to look to select the inside of the bowl. We're going to do Control C, which is copy, or Command C if you're on a Mac. And again, hit backspace to cut it out. So you should get the transparent area represented. And then to paste this area back in, you're going to hit Control V. That's paste, and we see that it's pasted in layer 1. So we can rename layer 1 inside a bowl. And we're going to look to manipulate the inside of the bowl layer to show the variation of a shadow in contrast to the shadow that's already on our subject. So if we're looking at the subject, the shadow is affecting to our right side of the subject's face. But a shadow of the inside of a bowl would actually affect the opposite side. So we're going to create a shadow that casts darker to lighter going from left to right. And we can still use the colors that we originally have over in our foreground and background colors. We've already taken the eyedropper tool to match the skin tone. And now we're going to use what should be the default black. If you're not seeing the black as the background color, simply double click to change the color picker. Select inside this large area, bring it down, and click OK. We're going to now use the magic wand to select again the inside bowl area. So with the magic wand, I'm going to click on that open area that we just created a duplicate of, or a new layer for. And the reason why we select it is if you try drawing a gradient with no area selected, it would apply over top of the whole image. So next we're going to look to change our tool from the paint bucket to the gradient tool. And again, we want to have a gradient that transfers from the skin tone to black. So foreground being the skin tone, black being the background. Take a look at the top navigation. We should again see that skin tone color and then black. And you can always modify or look to reduce the color of the black if you feel like it's too strong. But again, we're just looking for the basics of understanding the method of creating the bowl within the subject's head. So once I have the foreground with the skin tone and black in the background, there are other options as well, but we want to maintain as close to realistic for that shape. With the gradient tool from the left side navigation, I'm going to look to click and drag from the top right side of the head down to the left. And when I do that, you can see that it creates that open space or that black area within the head, but you can redo it if you feel that the shadow is not necessarily matching, or if you feel like it's too stark. You can redo it till you are satisfied with the overall look. And again, I showed the terracotta bowl just as a reference. We can see again on the inside the darker shadow affecting the left side, while the shadow affects the right side of the outer part of the terracotta bowl. So if I zoom in closer, we have that area selected out. I can deselect, Control D. And we've now created the basic element of creating the bowl shape for the head. But there's still areas that we want to incorporate. This includes adding in a burnt area, making the lip of the bowl a little bit more three-dimensional, not so flat of one color. So we're going to select the bowl lip layer. With the bowl lip layer, we're going to look to select the burn tool. Over on the left side navigation, we're going to look for the dodge tool and click and hold to select, and we'll see that we have the dodge tool, burn tool, and sponge tool. I usually like to use the burn tool to get the darker areas first, and we can lighten up areas with the dodge tool later on. But the burn tool is similar to the eraser or paintbrush, where we have to modify the brush size and modify the hardness depending on what you want. Again, the default is going to be, for the hardness, is going to be at 100%. So we may want to reduce this down. I'm going to reduce this down again to 50%. And for the size, again, I'm going to push up to about 40 pixels, but we can easily adjust using the right bracket or left bracket to make it smaller or larger. But with the bowl lip layer selected, I'm going to look to go around the lip of the bowl to darken it up to create a little bit more three-dimensionality. What I mean by this is we're going to burn the edge, darken this area, so it's not just a flat surface. Realistic, even with a flat surface, it would still have some types of tones, different colors, that would make it stand out. So if I move my cursor over, and click and drag across, you see that I get a darker rim around the back. And I can go around the front ridge, again darkening up some of these areas. That way I get a little bit of separation. If you ever mess up by accidentally clicking on some buttons, you can always hit Control Z to undo, or Command Z on a Mac. But again, I can look to shrink the size of my brush and go with a smaller burn, just getting the edge. And the more times you go over an area, the darker it's going to get. So be careful not to overdo it. I'm kind of just looking to kind of round out the lip overall. Then I can do the outer edge as well in the front. That way we have a little separation from the actual forehead. And then we can look to use the dodge tool. The dodge tool will look to lighten up areas. If I want to add a little bit of highlight, if I feel like it's too strong, too dark, the dodge tool will lighten up areas. Understand that it will lighten up into more of a white color, not necessarily back to the original peach or original skin tone. But if I click and drag, you can see the difference of how it adds in the highlight. Again, we want to make sure that we reduce the hardness of our brush. So at the top navigation, reduce the hardness so it doesn't necessarily come out with a sharp edge. again, this helps to kind of create more of a three-dimensional form, not being so flat. And that is just a very quick overview of the basic elements for the head and cutting it out while also doing retouching. Other additional elements we'll get into adding in the objects into the head. When it comes into adding in objects, I want to go up to File, Open. I'm going to just choose out a standard image of the apple. You would normally want to put your own twist, your own images, things that connect to your personality, your interests. But a standard image to kind of practice with, we can use an apple. I'm going to look again to select the magic wand, click on the black background. We need to invert the selection. So select inverse. I can hit Control C. Go back over to the photo headshot, Control V. And we have to make sure that we understand our layers. If I want to make it appear as if it's inside of the head, you can see that right now it's cutting inside of the open area. So I need to reorder my layers. I want to have the inside of the bowl behind my bowl lip. We also want to make it appear behind the lip itself. And you can see, even with my head layer in the front, the apple wouldn't necessarily appear in the background because the back of the lip is interfering. So there's a couple different methods you can look to create the sense that the apple is on the inside of the head. We can either have the apple layer, which I'm going to rename apple just so it's clear. We can rename the apple layer and then look to put the apple above the bowl lip. But we can use the Raster Mask to erase out areas of the apple that are overlapping the rim of the bowl. So down on the bottom of the layers panel, with the apple layer selected, I'm going to click on the layer mask or add Raster Mask. We see that white box appear over top of the apple layer. And then I'm going to click on the eraser tool. With the eraser tool, I have black as my background color. That's the most important part. We also want to make sure that white is the foreground color. Make sure it's not any skin tone. Still, we want to just go back up to the color picker, click OK, and we should see white on the foreground, black on the background. And with the eraser tool, I can adjust the size of the brush if I feel like it's too small. But I'm going to look to erase out the bottom portion of the apple, making it appear as if it's behind the rim of the head. But if you do move the apple, you have to understand it's going to reveal areas that you didn't erase before, or it might have an opening inside of it. We can reveal the apple at any point, simply clicking over on the paintbrush. And with the paintbrush tool, we can paint in the apple back into the area, again because we're using that Raster Mask. So it paints in back in the area. Or if I want to apply it behind the bowl lip, where we're now seeing the back of it and getting cut off because of the lip, we need to then add a Raster Mask onto the bowl lip. So I choose the bowl lip layer, click on the Add Raster Mask, and use the Eraser tool to erase out the areas of the bowl lip that are interfering or blocking the apple from being seen. And again, if I move the apple in any way, I'm going to have to paint back in those areas that I originally erased, or may have to redo the erase, adding in more areas to erase out later on. Again, make sure you have the correct layer selected, and we want to make sure that we have the actual raster mask selected. It gets confusing, so take your time in understanding the raster mask has to be selected for us to do this eraser. Because you don't want to erase on the original image and then not be able to save or recover your work. But I can click on the paintbrush tool if I erase too much and look to paint it back in. So I get the appearance that the apple's coming from inside of the head. So it takes some time, but you'll get used to it. And then we're going to look to put in additional elements following the same process for your own. Also including manipulation of adding in objects, we're also going to color our background. We can look to put more of a decorative background, but I'm going to create a new layer. I can rename this colored background. And I'm going to slide the color background underneath of the bottom of the layers. We don't need to go underneath the background layer. That's all the way at the bottom. That can't be seen. But with the colored background, I'm going to use a gradient tool just to give some type of interesting background. You can do something more interesting, something more dynamic. But with the gradient tool, I'm going to look to modify and come up with a colorful background, something that's going to be dynamic and interesting. I can start with the default colors, or I can look to click on the drop down and see the different presets that are given. So if I wanted to start from this yellow and this purple and orange color, I can double click on one of the colors and look to change it out. So if I want to pick a light blue, I have a light blue. If I want to get rid of this orange color, I just have to click and drag it downward to eliminate the color. Again, if I want to change this more plum color, double click on it. I can slide it down. Maybe I want to get just a darker variation of blue. And click OK. And click OK again. With the gradient tool, I can look to click and drag from top to bottom, creating some type of interest, a little bit more colorful, bright, vivid, more fun and playful, than leaving a blank or white background. We want to make sure that we make these dynamic and interesting. So however many objects you include, think about the background that's going to work with those objects. We don't want to pick a background that's going to clash or overpower the visual images that we included inside of the head. But later on, I can look to modify the head shape or the lid shape, edit, free transform. I can look to rotate it, maybe play with the positioning, maybe reorganize the layers so that's sitting on top and it makes it look like we're seeing it right on the cusp or it's opening from the side of the head. It's a matter of you trying to be as creative as possible. What can you create? You can look to add in your own graphics as well. If I decided that I wanted to use the Polygonal Lasso tool, create out my own unique element. Maybe it's some type of arrow or zigzag shape going through the design. I can use it to help draw the viewer through the image, creating interest. I can fill this image with white or fill it in with a color. And go edit, fill. Maybe I want to add in some shadows or burn in some areas, make it darker, make it more interesting. I can look again to use the burn tool to darken up some areas. If I want to modify a white color, I want to look to change the range on the top left side of our burn tool. I'm going to change it to highlights, to pick up the white color. And when I change this with the highlights, that will affect the color of the white. You can see just by adding in some shadows, it helps create a little bit more dimension. So it's not just a flat white color. So if I were to draw around this specific area, I can hold shift, select this area out as well. I can let go shift so I can have more free form in that selection. Again, holding shift so I can select out the top portion of this. Then again, use the burn tool to burn in some areas. Try to make it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more dynamic. But it's all about grabbing the attention of the viewer, making them be intrigued by the design. What are you trying to incorporate? What makes it your design in comparison to others? So again, there's many different things you can add, but see how creative you can get. I can deselect when I'm all done with that area. You can see how it just adds a little bit of interest, creating a little bit more three-dimensional form, even from a flat shape. So be as creative as possible. I wanted to see how creative you can get. Best of luck.